must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex.
What's up? I'm back. This is your host, Ricky Vance. This is the Ripple Effect Podcast. Thanks so much for being with me. And also, thanks for sticking with the show. I know sometimes we go a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks without a new episode. And I really, really appreciate everybody who sticks with the show. It seems like once a show comes out, there's immediate downloads. And that means that people continuously check the RSS feed or the YouTube channel looking for new episodes. And I really appreciate that because we don't have strict schedule. I try to put things out as soon as I have time, and once I have a little bit of time just to edit and get everything ready and put it out, I just put it out as soon as I can. I don't really look at it as, oh, maybe it's better if I release on Friday or Saturday or whatever day. I kind of have the same philosophy as Netflix, kind of how they put out a whole series. They'll put out a whole season and they just say, hey, watch it when you have time. Revolve the show around your schedule, and that's kind of the way I look at it. Revolve the show around your schedule. I'd hate for you to go on a trip on a Saturday, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour drive, and a new episode coming out on Sunday, but yet it was ready to release on Saturday, and I didn't because I wanted to wait, and then you could have listened to it on that Saturday. So hopefully that made sense, and hopefully you understand what I mean. It's just one of those things where sometimes it's happened to me where I'll have a long drive, and really I'm looking through my podcast. I'm like, oh, I've listened to all these, or none of them are really super interesting. And then the next day, a couple podcasts come out that are really interesting that I'm like, fuck, I wish I had these yesterday. I would have had some time to catch up on them and listen to them. So I just put them out, and hopefully you guys just, stick with the show because it is hard. I think this is one of those shows where people really connect with the issues and topics on most of these episodes because of the fact that the host is very much similar to the average listener. I have a full-time job. I'm very busy. I'm just like everybody else. 90% of my day in life revolves around doing shit I have to do, and very little time goes to doing things I'd like to do and my hobbies and stuff like that. So it's really hard to find time to do this, but I think this show is kind of a metaphor for what I've been talking about, the whole ripple effect. To think that I'm on episode 74, and the episode after this, actually, which will be coming out soon after this one, hopefully, because it's basically already done. And I have Jesse Ventura on, and that's episode 75. And to think that from episode 1, you go back in my archives and you listen to episode 1, which I highly recommend you not doing. Just take my word for it. I highly recommend you not doing because of the fact that it probably sucked. I haven't listened to it, but I'm pretty sure it sucked. But my point is that you go back, and if you were to listen to those shows, you'd hear me almost laugh about the idea of I'm going to be able to get some guests on the show. At that time, it was just me and my co-host Dave, and I really just was hoping and that somebody would write back, some of the people I emailed, and somebody might be crazy enough to come on a show that I just started. And to think that now, episode 74, I have Tyrel Ventura and Tabetha Wallace for the second time on the show, from the RT show, Watching the Hawks. And on the next episode, episode 75, I have Tyrel's father, Jesse Ventura. It's just fucking amazing. It's mind-blowing to think of it. And I'm just an average person. I had no background. I had no connections. I had nothing. I had an idea and a passion, and that's all it was. And just like I keep preaching, is this idea that we can all start our own ripple. We can all make a difference. And this show, hopefully, will show people that, yeah, absolutely. If you keep doing shit and you keep chasing your dreams and you keep following your passions and doing things you enjoy, it will pay off. And obviously financially, the show doesn't pay off for anything. I mean, it's an awful investment, but it pays off with the fulfillment that I get, with the fact that I feel like I'm doing something, and I get to talk to people that I admire and I'm a fan of, and I've been a fan of their work way before the show, or before I ever started the Ripple Effect podcast, and that alone is just amazing, and hopefully that motivates some of you guys to do stuff you enjoy. And the other thing too is, if you do things you enjoy, if you find more time to do the things you enjoy, if you use up that little bit of extra energy you have to maybe pick up the guitar at the end of the day and just play around with it, then, and it's happened to me, it'll be the end of the day, I'm tired as fuck, I'm like, I should just go to bed, but you know what, let me pick up the guitar, and I'm like, I don't feel like it, and then I do, and you know what happens, I end up playing it all night. I went from being tired and not thinking I had any energy to even, pick it up and mess around with it for a little bit, and next thing you know, it reignites something in you. You're happy again. You remember why you're so passionate about doing that hobby or that thing you enjoy, and then you can't put it down, or you can't stop doing it. So, I mean, if it's painting, if it's whatever, I mean, when I used to draw, same thing. There's times I was late at night, I was tired. I'm like, I have this idea about drawing something, and I would start drawing, and next thing you know, I'm up all night. I'm all night working on it, on this drawing. And same thing with music. Sometimes I'm tired as fuck, and some of the songs I released, I remember being up real late at night, just working on it, and it could have went either way, because there was nights where I'm like, I just don't have the energy. I'll just do it tomorrow. And then I'm like, fucking maybe I'll just try to spend 15 minutes on completing the song. And next thing you know, it's 15 minutes turned into what feels like 15 hours of just working throughout the night. And it's one of those things where if you find time, my point is, if you find time to do things you enjoy, you won't regret it. And it will pay off, even if it's just the payoff is only self-satisfaction, if it's bringing a little happiness to your life or a little bit of therapy, which a lot of times these hobbies are. It's just, that alone is worth it. So so thanks everybody who's been listening, everybody from Kansas, Wisconsin, California, New York. I mean, most of the people listening to the show are from places I've never been, everywhere from Ghana, Morocco, Israel, Spain, Poland, Mexico. I mean, you just name it. Every continent is represented, and I can't thank you guys enough. I wish I could connect with every single one of you guys and see what you guys liked and see what you enjoyed. And you know what? Hit me up on Facebook. Hit me up on Twitter. Let me know what you like. Let me know if there's any guests you enjoyed, any guests that you'd like to see me try to have on. And I'll do my best. And I truly appreciate everybody who has connected with me. And I know that, just like yourselves, I'm really busy, and we're all super busy. So if you're spending the time to connect with me, I really appreciate it. And I know you're taking time out of your busy schedule and day to write me. Then I'll definitely read it, and I'll definitely 99% of the time write back. So thanks again, guys. Today I have Tabetha Wallace and Tyrel Ventura. I'm not sure if I mentioned it in this intro yet, but Tabetha has been on before. You can check the archives. She's been on once before, and it was a really awesome and fun interview, so check that one out. They're the hosts of a show called Watching the Hawks, which is available on RT. You can get the RT phone app, which is a pretty badass app. You can live stream RT. You can get all the shows for free. You can go on the RT website, which I believe is probably rt.com or rtamerica.com, something like that. Just Google it. You'll find it. And also they have a YouTube channel, which you could just search. I'm sure you'll find it. And actually, Watching the Hawks has their own YouTube channel, so you can find that YouTube channel for specifically Watching the Hawks. So check that out. And they upload the shows soon after they're televised every night. So they're pretty up to date with the episodes. So check that out. And they used to be hosts of a show called Buzzsaw with Sean Stone on the Lip TV, which is another YouTube channel. And Sean continues to do that show, but also he co-hosts Watching the Hawks with these guys. And Sean's been on before, so if you want to check that interview out, it was a really fun show. So check out the archives and look up Sean Stone. And Tabetha's been on before, which I think I mentioned already. So enjoy the show, guys. Hopefully the intro wasn't too long. And I'll see you in the next one. And thank you so much. I know I keep saying it, but from the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate everybody who goes out of their way to listen to this show, and people from all over the world who take time out of their day to listen to these conversations and my guests and my opinions and whatever you find interesting or intriguing in this show. I'm just glad you keep coming back for more. And I'm one of those people that I'm just not a podcast host, but I'm a podcast fan, and I just hope I'm doing for other people's lives what podcasts have done for my life, and that's made traveling way more enjoyable. It's made chores way more enjoyable because I can just put on a podcast. And after high school or after college or whatever, however far you went in the school system, you know, it doesn't mean your brain turns off. It doesn't mean you can't continuously learn. And podcasting has done that for me, where I can continuously learn and not just exercise my physical muscles, but my mental muscle, which I think a lot of times after school we end up turning off or are just not exercising enough. And I think it's fun to continuously learn and just grow and learn in a way that's fun. You can just put on a podcast. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort. You know, it's not like reading a long book or anything, and you can really get a lot, and you can learn about philosophy, you can learn about history, you can learn just about yourself, just listening to people talk about their own experiences and enjoyments and struggles and whatever it may be. So thanks again, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. So what's up, guys? Thanks for being with me. I really appreciate it. It's funny. It's kind of a weird coincidence because I actually just booked Jesse Ventura for Tuesday. So yeah, and it's funny because I've been trying to get in contact with him for quite a bit, and then I'm like, that's crazy. A couple days apart, I'm gonna have the son and the father. So it'd be pretty cool to have you guys a couple days apart.
It's funny, man, because it's like when we started watching the Hawks, like a couple weeks later, RT and Aura had worked out a deal to put like a kind of a off the grid on 1 day a week on RT, and so it's just kind of funny. It was like we started our show, and then like 2 weeks later, all of a sudden Jesse's show's on. So we seem to follow each other now.
Yeah. It's funny because does he still have his show online? Because I'm a little confused about that. It's still online as Aura TV, and it's on Friday nights on RT, right, at 9:00.
Yeah. What they do is like he'll do his online show will air, I think, like Monday through Thursday, and then the RT show is kind of like they have some new content, but generally it's kind of like it also like pulls in some of the highlights from the week, the week of broadcast. So
yeah, that's awesome. It's funny because you guys started off on Buzzsaw and with Sean, which I actually had Sean on too sometime after Tabetha. So I've had all three of you guys on, so that's pretty cool. And it's funny because when you guys started Buzzsaw, the internet thing was still, was really picking up pace, and obviously with the Young Turks and all that stuff. And it's funny because now having a show online almost seems as credible or more credible than having one on, like before. I feel like years ago you'd be like, oh, well, what do you do? Oh, I have a show on YouTube. It sounds silly. And now it's like, it's quite the credible thing. I watch all my news online and really don't watch any mainstream media or anything on TV, to be honest. And I think that's kind of the trend. I mean, do you see that being the future now?
I do, and actually it's funny you mentioned that because we were talking about numbers, because you have so many people who say so many people watch mainstream news, but when you really look at the ratings and even the online numbers of, the three major cable networks, I mean, Fox News is number one in cable news, and they only get like 1.6 to 1.7 million people in their primetime slot. That's not a lot of people when you think that 318 million people live in this country. So this teeny tiny, like 0.2% of the whole population. So I think there's this sort of twisted idea of how many people are really getting their news from that. And even on the three major non-cable news, NBC, ABC, CBS, they only get about 5 million a night.
Yeah.
Which is still, when you add it all together, people watching the three mainstream, non-cable news, three cable news, it still only comes out to about 20-some million people, which still only accounts for about 10% of the U.S. population. Yeah. So obviously, the rest of them aren't completely, out of touch with reality. They're getting their news from somewhere.
And how many of those people are, just have it on in the background? And I've been to a lot of people's houses. It's just on CNN or Fox News. Nobody's really watching it. Nobody's paying attention to it. I mean, when somebody tunes into, when you guys were on Buzzsaw, or even what I do, usually I can't catch watching the Hawks live, but the next day, you end up uploading it, I believe, the same night. So by the next morning, it's the new episode from the night before is always on. So I usually get my coffee before work, get my tablet, put it on, and while I'm making my breakfast and all that stuff, I have it playing in the background. And that's kind of like my morning routine every morning. And it's just one of those things where it's convenient. I can watch it when I want. No real commercials. Well, you guys have RT commercials, but it's not, promotions for all this other junk. And I don't know if it just seems more tolerable because it's just RT commercials, but it definitely seems a little more tolerable. So it seems like your views and seeing how many people are watching your show seems more accurate than their ratings for their shows, because really you don't know who's paying attention. I mean, at my gym they have it in the background, so I mean that's some more views that nobody's really paying attention to it. So I think that it's even their what they call it their viewership, that even that's kind of tainted and we're not very accurate.
Oh yeah, no, I mean it's interesting too. Like when you look at online, I mean looking at numbers last night, and like CNN's YouTube page has about 800,000 subscribers, but their numbers of like what they actually watch on YouTube are just small. I mean it's like maybe 300, 400. Now and then they'll get like 1,000 views on something. If it's like some bigger story, it might pull like a 30,000, 40,000 view, but it's not consistent at all. But yet you look at like RT, they have like 1.7 million YouTube subscribers. And that's like, and their numbers like dwarf the network numbers when it comes to like online watching. And you brought up that point about like commercials. What's interesting is like it feels a little bit more like radio in the sense of, when you watch like a podcast or like something like that, they'll have an advertisement for like another show on the podcast, and that's about it. Now and then there might be something else, but like, I think people enjoy like, advertise me for what's on your station. Don't send me like, don't advertise me to a bunch of that might not have anything to do with what you're talking about.
Political ads, which I think is really unseemly. I mean, I know they're not full on like vote for this person, but the thing you see on mainstream media a lot is, these weird ads for the TPP supporting like trade or Keystone or something, and it's, it's political pandering, and they're buying the airtime. And really what it is like you said, CNN is in every airport. It's in doctors' offices. And depending on where you go in the country, you might see Fox News in the doctor's office playing. But how many people are actively consuming that?
It's background noise.
It is. Yeah, it absolutely, it's background noise. Yeah, you make a really good point. And I think I think the younger generation, our generation and younger, they really don't give a shit about what's on mainstream media. They really don't pay attention to it at all. And now with like podcasts getting more popular and online media, I mean, they're growing up in a generation where that's the norm to them, is getting your entertainment from YouTube, from a podcast app on your phone, and listen to it. So I think it's a great direction, and I think little by little they're going to have less and less power, because unfortunately we live in these lives where and even myself, I work a full-time job. We have a small family-owned business, and it takes up so much of my time that a lot of times, like the average person, they come home and they put on the news for a couple hours while they're spending some time with their kids, and they pass out. And whatever is fed to them is what they take in. They don't have time to research stuff. That's why I love your show. I was glad that after Abby Martin left, RT with Breaking the Set, I'm like, what's going to fill that spot? I'm like, something needs to fill that. And I know it probably wasn't like, oh, this is the Breaking the Set replacement, but for viewers like me who watch Breaking the Set on regular basis, it kind of was, because it's like I need another spot where I can kind of watch. And the cool thing about your show is that you do a little bit of everything. You throw all three of your opinions in, which is cool because you guys are all very different in backgrounds, but yet all open-minded. That's the one similarity, and you get different perspectives. Obviously Sean has very wild different opinions on stuff and sees things from different perspectives. Tyrel and you being hands-on with, both you guys being hands-on in Hollywood, and you have a political background with your dad being in politics. I'm sure you've seen things from behind the curtain a little bit. So and you coming from the very average family, which I think is very important. I think that no offense, Tyrel, I'm sure you and Sean, obviously having very influential fathers, and that's an awesome thing. But I think it's cool to have somebody who comes from a very normal background like the average person, because that's where I come from. I was born in a farm in Portugal, very average. My dad worked the typical American story, the foreigner parents that came here. We came here. My dad worked construction. My mom worked at a factory, and so to get that perspective too, from the blue-collared perspective, I think is very important too. So how did you guys all meet? Because you did come from different backgrounds and stuff like that. How did you? Because obviously you guys all connected on Buzzsaw, and now that that friendship has continued. But how did you initially all meet?
Just be quick. We started the show.
Yeah,
right?
Let me just mention what
I'm so used to seeing like the red light and the countdown. I'm like, wait, no, we started this.
Well, you know what happened was, I always used to get emails and people would be like, "Oh, so when's the interview?" I'm like, "Well, it's not really an interview. It's more like I like the conversation." I think people are tired of that whole just Q&A, typical question, typical answer thing. So what I used to do was do a little intro. I'm like, "Oh, I'll introduce you guys, and then we'll start." But it always like kind of took away from the flow of the conversation. Because sometimes we'd get in a conversation before I started recording, and I'm like, fuck, I wish I recorded that. So now I'm just like, I'm just gonna go right into it, and then later I'll do an intro, and then and then that way it kind of keeps the flow of the conversation and keeps the casualness, which I like about watching the Hawks, because you guys do the current events and then you talk about it. And I think it kind of has that same intrigue as people have in podcasts, where like, oh, this seems uncensored. This seems like a conversation I would have with my friends. People like that, and I think that's one of the things people like about your show.
That's I think what we were really going for, because when you have as you're saying, these kind of three different dynamic personalities, we were trying to form, we're trying to create a show around that, and I think the conversations that me and Tabitha and Sean would have together, just going out for coffee or whatever it may be, that's where you would that's where you would relate the most, because you want to talk to people, you want to introduce a story, but then you want to talk to people, like you said, as if you're sitting around a kitchen table. How people talk politics, how normal people, everyday people talk these issues, and I think that having that connection on the show that way, and speaking to people as their peers rather than as like the important newscaster talking down to you, I think it's lacking in mainstream media in that sense. And I mean, even when you watch other shows like The Five, there's still this kind of like level of, well, we're up here and you're down there, and just listen to us because we're right. That's the last thing that I think I can speak for you and Sean. That's the last thing that we want. We want to have a conversation with not only ourselves, but the audience and all of that. And I think that's why we kind of picked that style of format.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of it is too that you have this idea that these are experts. And that's what they want to perpetuate. That when you turn on the news, when you turn on, whatever show you're watching, whether it's, The Five or Anderson Cooper, that these people are experts in the field, that they are experts at breaking down the news and information and telling you what's most important. And I mean, they might be, but I don't know that they know exactly what everybody. You can't assume to know what 318 million people think or need, or what their dreams are, or what their goals are, or what is truly important to them. And it's there's that sort of trying to do that by saying like, oh, we'll put a libertarian and we'll put a Democrat and we'll put a Republican around a table and see what happens. But at the end of the day, that's three people who ultimately believe in a system that most people are starting to turn away from.
Yeah.
So you're always going to have this, so they all want to keep the system that's in place. They all want to keep this Democrat, Republican, a little bit of libertarian, and we all argue the same amount. They want to keep it in place. Well, like, I call myself a political atheist. Because I just don't believe in the power of partisan politics. No. It has no power over me. You're never going to convince me that joining this one little club and fighting against every other little club is the way to run a democracy. It's just not. And I think that's one of the reasons, the three of us became friends. You knew Sean first.
Yeah, I knew Sean from working on conspiracy theory. We had met through some mutual friends in LA, and when we were kind of ramping up to do the third season of conspiracy theory, my dad, Jesse, was in this kind of, he was in the middle of a lawsuit with the TSA over, he felt it was unconstitutional for them to, pat him down and search him every time he flew. And so he wasn't flying, and so they needed to kind of get, they needed something. We couldn't travel Jesse around the United States as easy as we could in the previous two seasons. So they kind of came to me and said, would you be interested in going from behind the scenes working on the show to being in front of the camera? And I said, well, I understand the issue we're in, so sure, yeah, I'll hit the road. And at that time, I'd kind of met Sean, and we really clicked in a lot of the, it was fun talking to the guy, and he's an insightful, brilliant guy. And I just felt like for the style of show, he'd be perfect. And so when I kind of brought him in to meet the other producers on conspiracy theory, we all really gelled, and it really clicked. And I said, yeah, this is a good fit. And and then in the meantime, I had become friends with Tabetha, and we had done, we started producing some shows.
Yeah,
we became best friends, and her viewpoints and her intelligence was wonderfully complementary and yet radically different, and it just gelled. So then when Buzzsaw came along, it was right after conspiracy theory had ended, and they kind of came to me and Sean and said, you guys be interested in doing an online show? And originally we had said, well, yeah, great, but I want to bring Tabetha in to produce the show, because she's a brilliant producer. And then that kind of it ended up me, Sean doing interviews and me talking. I mean, in the test runs, it was like Sean doing interviews and me talking with a camera, and it didn't quite have the juice that it had when the three of us were together talking. And so that's when they were we were like, let's bring Tabetha up and have me and her have the discussion, Sean do some interviews, and then, through all of that, and the show really took off, through all of that brought us to RT's doorstep. And, they brought us on to produce news for them about a year before the show actually started, before watching the Hawks.
It was about a year ago that we came out to DC, and that's when we started working on the news, which I'm really glad I had that opportunity, because coming from, I worked at a Newsweek years ago in 2002, and that was the I sort of saw the innards of mainstream news or mainstream media, and especially with something like a news magazine. And at the time, of course, it was failing because nobody was reading that stuff anyway. And, in a world where things were happening minute to minute, people really were just watching, CNN or the nightly news to get a roundup. Nobody needed to read it. They were more concerned with making sure people would buy it than they were putting out the best news possible. And I definitely was sitting there with people who were in charge that, not to say they didn't do a good job or that they were unethical, but I definitely saw times where they were holding back, or they were going with a narrative that seemed very concocted. It seemed as if they didn't quite buy it, but that was the way you were supposed to, that's the way you're supposed to say it, which was told to me a lot. And I would say, but why are we saying it like this? Doesn't it actually look more like this? When you look at the events, why are we describing it this way? Or pointing fingers at this person, why are we putting the blame on this group or this country? And the answer I kept getting over and over was, well, that's the way we do it. That's the way it's done. And when I had the opportunity to stay there and stay on that path of working in news in that capacity, I said no, because I didn't feel right. Something about it didn't feel right. So I went, I'll rather go to the movie business, or at least the artifice is honest. You're honest about the artifice. But, I was working for Fareed Zakaria, who's now at CNN, and a couple of other people who now, as I jokingly refer to it, they write press releases for the Pentagon. They work at mainstream outlets like Yahoo News and things like that. And I see people I worked with that were definitely in that, just right, this is how it's done. Yeah. And you weren't allowed to question it. And being able to go then years later and sort of see how it's done is done again, and watching people who were willing to question, who were willing to sit around a table and battle for a viewpoint and make sure that things were being, covered, because everybody has their own perspective and opinion. It's so easy to say, like, well, they're biased and they only break this, and every time you watch Fox News, if someone's telling you a story, they're doing it because of this set bias. But it's probably a bunch of people sitting in a room, and it's sort of like, it's either one person wins and their viewpoints, that's the narrative that goes, whether that's the State Department or a political party or just that person feels that way. And then there's the times when you're able to find a middle ground, and being able to watch people who found that middle ground, who figured out a way, to talk to each other and be honest about what was there. And people were like, no, I really feel like this is, I want every day. That's the idea. It's like this every day.
Working in the news, producing in the news division at RT, they're I think, they're 3 times they broadcast their daily news, and producing that, it was great, because it really reminded me a lot of, like, when you watch, like, the old movies of, like, All the President's Men, of, like, old time newsrooms, where the story was most important. The spin on the story, it wasn't, reporters and producers would come in and say, hey, we found, these 18 stories, we got to whittle it down to fit into the half hour, but, like, let's start from here, and everyone's throwing out ideas, and, and you saw that kind of, it felt like real journalism again. It felt like, we're producing a show on the best merits of the stories for that show, not on the merits of the channel, merits of
what will get the most views,
or it was really like, what's really important for people to learn about today. And and in the process doing that, we get to then get to work for a little bit with the great who's a brilliant journalist, and watching him work is incredible, and all the folks over there in the RT News division, it was really a great learning experience, and a joy, and kind of working on that, and then at the same time slowly putting our show together. Was just fantastic. It was very refreshing, especially coming out of, like, the trials and tribulations of Hollywood and that whole other kind of world of production and storytelling.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about RT is that I'm sure you guys probably already know the questions people ask about, hey, are you restricted on what you can say when it comes down to foreign policy and geopolitical issues? And I know Abby, since she's left Breaking the Set, she's said, some things about, like, okay, maybe you couldn't. I mean, obviously, it's sponsored by Russia. You can't. I'm sure they would have some issue with coming on the air and saying, yeah, Russia's a huge issue, and but I always say, judge the content by the content. Like, watch the show, and then the fact that you guys, I mean, first of all, we talked about commercials briefly. Because there's not corporate commercials between segments, you have to believe that those corporate interests have some power over the stories and how the story's told and stuff like that. So the fact that there's not a corporation between segments, trying to sell their product, personally, I feel like that makes me feel like, okay, well, the only product they're trying to sell is their own shows. So that means that they can kind of have free range to kind of tell any story they want. To do a vaccine story, then have a Merck commercial or whatever, like, obviously you'd be like, oh, well, maybe I should think twice about that vaccine commercial, that vaccine segment. So, I think it's a good thing, the fact that it's state sponsored. A lot of people, go to BBC, Al Jazeera, all these other news stations, organizations that have state sponsored, of money, and I think it's a good thing, because you do have one issue of, okay, maybe if you did do a Russian story, you'd have a little bit of restrictions, but outside of that, there's 1,000 other fucking stories you can do that you have no restrictions on.
Here's the thing, I'm more concerned with, like, there's so many stories in the world. First of all, I'm an American living in America on RT America. Our show is also broadcast internationally, giving a perspective, which to me is really important because it's giving the world a perspective of Americans that isn't like what they're seeing on other stations. And I'd like them to know that some of us, most of us, are reasonable people who have a little bit of thought and don't just digest whatever we're told and go crazy with it. To me, it's like I don't feel that I'm in a position to be doing a bunch of stories on Russian politics when I'm just learning enough about Russian politics. And Russian politics, at the end of the day, it's not my beat. You know, it's not my beat. And if stories come up, I have never. I mean, the thing is, even on the news, I've pitched stories in the newsroom that were not pro-Russia, that were critical of things that were going on, and everybody had an honest discussion about it, and those stories ended up on the news. Yeah. So
I have never, I speak for Tyrel, so I have never felt any kind of hand of censorship from the top down.
We've never had a story cut on our show. We have complete editorial control.
Yeah, I have never ever had. I've never had it. I've never seen it. I've never seen the red phone ring in Moscow calling saying you're going to talk about this and don't talk about this. I've never felt any kind of or I've never felt that. I've never felt propagandized. I've never felt anything like that, and that's my experience with it. And it's been my experience, and I wouldn't work for a station where I felt I was being, either manipulated or I was being told what I can and can't say. I've never felt that hand at working at RT ever. I can honestly say that pretty much, every story gets the same kind of, critical eye, no matter what it's about, and. When people are got up of it's propaganda. I mean, everything's propaganda today. I mean, your podcast is propaganda.
Hey. I know you mean.
By definition, marketing, any of it, when you're trying,
marketing to people is the definition of a certain propaganda.
Edward Bernays and obviously his influence. I mean, Sigmund Freud's nephew, and I mean, just understanding how to sell a product. I mean, obviously anybody who goes into marketing knows Edward Bernays and PR and all that stuff. So you're right. Yeah, technically we're all trying to sell something, and that's the thing. Propaganda doesn't necessarily. I know certain things get I guess just lumped in as bad. But I mean, propaganda, like I have friends that are like, oh, you watch documentaries or you get, and I think like there's a lot of great documentaries out there. Obviously, there's a lot of ones that are trying to sell you a point of view. But if that person's influenced to sell me their point of view, and in the process of me watching that documentary, I also get some really good information, then I'm okay with that. So it is a propaganda film trying to sell me, this perspective. But yet in that journey, if I get some good information and inform some good information and get more informed on that topic, then maybe it's not all bad, so.
Well, it's also that thing of too, is it's people in their viewing habits gravitate to things that either challenge them or things they agree with, and when people are flipping channels or looking or watching a podcast or listening to something or watching online content, they're going to go to where they feel, these people are telling me something that maybe at times I'll disagree with them, but other times, I really like what they have to say. That into itself is, I'm going to go with the people telling me what I want to hear, and
which doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't help you understand the world any better to sit and say, I only want to talk with people who agree with me. Right. I never want to talk to anybody. And that's one thing we want to do on the show. And we've had people on the show who politically I disagree with, or I have issues with something that they say. And what we want to do on this show is we've had that opportunity to say, okay, you've said this, and I need you, or I would like you to explain it to me and make it rational for me, because it doesn't seem rational to most folks, and say, explain yourself, sell me on it, because that's my thing. I'm like, sell me, pitch me your ideology of
it's
what
fun.
it is.
Like I say, man, I enjoy working for, a network. Right, every day we come in and we pitch stories, and they're like, great, this sounds great, man, go knock it out. If any other network came to me and said, hey, I'll give you full editorial control and do your thing and talk about what interests you and what you feel people need to learn about. But I worked for MSNBC. You're not going to get that. Many years ago when I worked for MSNBC on a brief time when they kind of got Jesse right after he was governor. You'd get 7 stories every day in your email of like what you're supposed to talk about that day, and you couldn't deviate from those 7 stories. Now the host could put their spin on it, but it had to be those 7 stories. You could not. And we fought tooth and nail to not do that, to not talk about the Kobe Bryant, rape case in Colorado, because it doesn't really affect us all. And remember, how is that news? How is that, how is that informing people when you're locked into 5-6 stories every morning before you even had a chance to have a cup of coffee?
Yeah. Oh yeah, and that's the thing. Like you look at the guy who created Young Turks. I'm having a brain fire with his name. Cenk. Cenk. Yeah. He was another one who worked at MSNBC, was outspoken, and then he ends up. And Phil Donahue, who had the highest rated show on MSNBC, and then he was outspoken about the Iraq War, and then he gets cut. I mean, Amber Lyons, who worked at CNN. There's tons of these stories, and you can watch.
You don't see that at RT. I've never seen that at RT. I've never seen an email saying like, "Hey, you got to talk about these 5 stories," and that's it. I've never in my entire time working there have ever got an email saying, "Hey, this is what we're going with."
Well, it was funny because people used to say, "Oh, I'm sorry." Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, but the only time I've ever been challenged on a story was challenged to present it in a way that makes sense, that's honest, like whatever it is. The only time I've ever been like, why is this interesting? And they'll make you work for it. They'll be like, okay, tell me why this is interesting. The other thing is, most of the people there come from a long range of backgrounds. They're gay, straight, male, female, American, Iranian, Iraqi, Russian. It's a
melting pot of journalists.
Of journalists that come from a ton of backgrounds, who come from mainstream media, who come from independent, or come, straight out of school. There's people with such a wide background there that there's a million people checking you. And there's a million people going, but if you say it like this, a lot of times you have so many people working together to make sure that we're all doing the best job possible. That it's sort of like,
for the sake of the story, do the best job possible for the sake of the story, not for the sake of the channel, not for the sake of that. Like I said, I couldn't be happier to find a news agency.
If there was an American government-run news agency that ran the same way and allowed people to do what we do, that would be awesome, but we don't have that.
Exactly.
And I'm not anti-American. That's the thing. All RT wants to do is anti-American. For God's sake, I did a Rolling Thunder package where I sat there and talked to veterans all day. I did a very pro-America package. It was critical of what's happening, but I had veterans. These are war heroes talking about their experience, and it was never questioned whether I should do a pro-America piece, and I did. And I think, like with that one, the thing that was the biggest issue was people were like, "There's no press here." There's 700,000 veterans and their families and their friends got on motorcycles and rallied through DC on Memorial Day weekend. 700,000 and another like 500,000 spectators. And there was zero mainstream media there. There was a couple of local people and they didn't talk to anybody. And the guys I talked to there they were like, "Oh, you're in the press. Yeah, who are you with?" And you had he had spoken to one person who.
He was like, "Well, who are you with?" And I said, "Well, with RT." And he looked at me and he was like, "You mean to tell me that the Russian news agency is coming to cover, U.S. veterans issues and this, and you don't see a single other mainstream cable news source here?" He said, and pardon my vulgarity, he said, "That's fucked up." He says, "I love you guys for being here, and thank you so much for being here. It means a lot, but it's fucked up that our own news agencies cover this, and that's what you see. And I think a lot of the pushback you get towards RT and Al Jazeera and BBC, when you see that pushback, is because they are covering stories that are more important to U.S. citizens and citizens around the world that the other media won't touch for whatever reasons. They don't find it interesting. Their corporate handlers won't allow them to talk about, Pfizer. Like we've said. And
people are smarter. Most people, even like Middle America. I mean, I talk to people that my family and friends who live in smack dab in the middle of the country and work in middle and lower middle class jobs. These are people who are regular folk. And I'll tell you, they're on average watching things like Al Jazeera now. Yeah. They'll still watch a little Fox News. They'll watch maybe Bill O'Reilly, but they'll also watch like Rachel Maddow. Yeah. Like what I'm seeing is that they're watching maybe one show from different networks, but they're also watching something international. Obviously, they all watch my show now, but but they're reaching out. Now, Al Jazeera is the new one that I'm hearing more and more. They're like, oh, but I learned a lot about what's going on in the world. And when I say, well, don't they do international? They do international news on CNN, and they're like,
not really. Yeah.
I don't really know, and I don't believe anything. They're like, I don't trust them, because they've seen these are people who live real life. They know what the healthcare system is really like because they're there on the ground. They know how veterans are treated because they're veterans. They know how capitalism is not working. They see the factory shutting down. These are people they're victims of the kind of policies in Washington and on Wall Street that they'd want to pretend aren't happening.
Yeah.
And people are the ones who they're changing their tune, which is why you say like 10% of the population is even watching these.
Well, like you said earlier, then people are getting their news and their information from 1,000 different areas now, and I think that's a really great thing. I think that's a powerful thing. It's an important thing that people aren't being spoon-fed how to think and how to believe, and they can go to 1,000 different sites and get a 100 different perspectives of a story, whether it be from international news agencies or here at home or citizen journalists or whatever it may be. You can get all these different perspectives, and that's important. We need to, in order to be a truly good, full functioning member of a society, you have to be informed, and you have to be able to make your political decisions based on your beliefs and how those beliefs are informed. And if you're open and broad-minded enough to say, you know what, I want to see a story from 5, 6, 7 different angles so I can kind of get to the root of it and then make my educated decision on how I feel, how I want to vote, whatever it may be, that's a beautiful thing. And I think we live in a time where you have the ability to do that more than ever. And it's an exciting time, and it's an exciting time to be a part of, the news. It's an exciting time to, in our sense, we offer opinion and analysis at the end of the day, and I think it's an exciting time to be part of that.
Yeah, it is, and I think it is awesome that people are getting different sides, and I think that's why people go to RT. I mean, I watch most of my news in RT, and I mean, I Tom Hartman's show, even though he's too progressive sometimes for me, but he still puts out great stories, and it's like you can't ignore the fact that he'll talk about stories that you won't get from other places. Your show, I mean, Aaron Aid's Boom Bust, like that's a good show. I mean, there's tons of great shows in RT, and it's just like sometimes I'm just like, damn man, I watch all my news on RT, and but it's one of those things where just like, well, unless I start getting the sense that this is becoming one-sided or whatever, and like you said, most of the news is American news, and I have an issue with like people thinking because you're highlighting what's wrong with the system, you're anti-American. It's like that's such bullshit. It's almost like during the Iraq and Afghan war where they did a great job. If you're anti that war, you're anti-troops, and it's like you can't be pro-troops and anti the war. The most pro-troops thing you can be is anti-war, because that's saying that putting the troops in harm's way should be the last resort. I just had Lawrence Wilkerson on, who was the chief of staff for Colin Powell, and we were talking about and he's outspoken. He's another guy who's was a Republican, and he was a Vietnam vet. His dad was a World War II vet, and the way they treat veterans in the U.S. I mean, I forget what the suicide rate is. It's ridiculous.
22 a day.
That's insane. And 1 out of 4 or 5 homeless people is a veteran, something like that. Yeah. I mean, it's like we're all pro troops when we're sending them there, and then when they come back, we just leave them hanging. And it's like, and the worst part is like, my wife watches, those silly shows like Dancing with the Stars, and they had the veteran. I don't know if he was from Iraq or Afghan where he went, but he lost 2 limbs, his leg and his arm, and every time I saw it, it would just make me so angry, because I'm just like, this poor guy has to live the rest of his life, basically disabled, for a war that now we look back and say, yeah, we kind of fucked up. Yeah, we all agree that was kind of just a fuck up. And it's just like, we're all just going on with our lives, but we forget that there's people's lives that will never be the same again. The rest of us can move on and just say, yeah, that was a fuck up. We kind of messed up. We shouldn't have went into Iraq, and we created ISIS and all this other stuff. But, there are people who will never be the same because of a giant fuck up like that, and we have to remember that. We have to remember that we're creating, one person's terrorist, another person's freedom fighter. We go to a country, and like the story in Yemen, we killed, a wedding. I think it was a wedding once, and you don't think that those people who were related to those family members aren't going to be forever hating the country of the U.S. You
always got to put it into your own perspective. If you went to your cousin's wedding and Canada decided to send a drone and drop a bomb on your cousin's wedding, you probably wouldn't like Canada very much.
And neither would any of your friends or family.
Yeah,
or your neighbors.
You would hate them. You would truly hate them, because I'm sorry, when it comes to loss, it's hard to have a global sense of right or wrong when it comes to something that directly affects you, and our policy is so, backwards because of that. It's like, we think that, okay, because they must know we're right, they will sacrifice civilian casualties because they know we're right. And that's ludicrous. You're never going to tell someone who lost a brother, a sister, a mother, or grandmother that, well, don't worry, the country that dropped a bomb on your family, they were in the side of rights. So no one's ever going to think that.
You can't. I mean, it's this idea that if you don't know how they feel, look at the angry Americans, the Islamophobia in this country. It is built on the fact that some people did something that was, horrible, and did it without any really clear goal in mind. It wasn't like, we are doing this to get this person out. We're doing this to do this. It was meant to cause destruction. It was meant to cause terror, and it worked. And now you have a bunch of people who want to marginalize an entire section of the world population, who want to paint them as, an entire race, an entire religion, as horrible and evil and dangerous, and are working very hard for the entire world to believe that their human life doesn't mean as much as theirs.
Yeah.
And then they will wonder why there are groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. There's a reason, because these people are living through what happened in one day here. They live through every day on the scale. They know somebody who is, all they see are big machines dropping bombs. And they're coming from a country that they don't live in, that isn't part of their government, that doesn't understand them, and that they don't understand.
Yeah.
Also, you have to remember that people across the Middle East, no matter where you go, most of them who are in war-torn areas don't have Facebook. Okay? They don't have CNN. They don't have that. So this idea that they have all the information we have and they're making a decision about America based on having all the information is ludicrous.
Yeah.
They don't even have cell phones most of the time in these places, and we're expecting them to be as informed.
Yeah,
but we didn't give them any information. I mean, that's the whole thing. We went into Iraq, we destroyed their infrastructure. It's not like we put up cell towers. It's not like we put up TV towers. It's not like we started pumping in 20 different news channels so they could see the rest of the world and get a better understanding of things. We didn't do that.
Yeah.
In fact, we made it even harder for them to get any kind of perspective.
Yeah, it's you can't, it's a ludicrous foreign policy. And when you see these people like, okay, well, we got to go out and bomb, we got to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and then if they don't, we're going to bomb them. The idea of perpetually starting a fight with everybody that maybe disagrees with you politically or on whatever level, that, well, the only way to get rid of them is to eradicate the bad guys. There's no end to that. I always want to ask these, when you see, you see these chicken hawks or, all these kind of military hawks, it's like, well, what's the end game? After, the more that you vanquish, the more bombs you drop, at some point, what do you think that eventually wipe everyone off the face of the earth and that's it? There's no end game. The only way you change a culture from oppression, and the only way you can truly change a culture is through, honestly, and people, call me a bleeding heart for saying this, but the only way you can change is through love, through understanding, through education, through knowledge. That's how you change a culture. That's when you get into a fight with a stranger, on the street, or your best friend. What happens? You can either go to fisticuffs, and you guys probably hate each other your life because you went to fisticuffs, or if you sit down and have a conversation with that person so they can see both sides, where you're coming from, you can see where they're coming from, and maybe you might disagree, but at least you can have an understanding where you didn't have to start throwing punches. And instead, there's elements of our government that has this very reactionary, they said something mean, they did something violent, we need to go be violent back. It's never going to work. Violence versus violence does not change anything. It does not change anything for the better. It just perpetuates more violence. I mean, Game of Thrones, the most popular show on television right now. I think in watching that show, you can see violence perpetuates violence, and it does not solve the problem.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I've had Mariana Van Zeller, who has that show on the Travel Channel, Breaking Borders, and it's a great show because it takes people from both sides of the conflict, sits them down, they have dinner, and they have some drinks, and you realize, we're all not that much different. We all care about, being in a safe environment, having a roof over our head, having enough food, a safe environment for our kids or children. Like, that's what we all care about. All these other ideologies and all that stuff really isn't that important. We do a great job of picking, you're a liberal, or you're a conservative, or you're a libertarian, or whatever. And all these words, we just, it's like you pick a team. And I think we have to look at it as, I've had people on who from the Zeitgeist movement. I've had people on who absolutely hate the Zeitgeist movement. And but I think the thing is that, like, if everybody's goal is to try to change a broken system and try to make the world better, and like you said, it might sound silly, but maybe export love instead of exporting violence, and I mean, I think that the world will be much better, and I think that's all most people want, is just they want a safe environment. They want be able to love their family and kids and spend time with them, and all this other stuff that separates us, all these exterior things, I think are just not as important as we make it seem. And I think it's a great way of kind of getting us to turn on each other and getting us to argue. And like you talked about the CNN thing, where you get one person from Fox News, or from the Republican point of view, somebody from the Democrat point of view. They both pick their sides. Neither of them are gonna. It's almost like the atheist Christian debates. It's like nobody's ever gonna say, "Oh yeah, you made a good point." They're just there to kind of defend their side. And to me, that's pointless. I always say on the show that my point of views, whatever they are, they can change. They've changed since I started this podcast, and they're forever changing. And we should always be open to new ideas, because there's been plenty of times I've had an established opinion on something, and then after 6 months, 4 months, whatever, of researching stuff, hearing conversation, I'm like, I was wrong about that. And
that's because you're an intelligent, free-thinking human being, and that's what we all want to aspire to be, is to be an intelligent, free-thinking human being, and aspire to. I have my viewpoints, but I'm going to leave them open for change if someone, or something convinces me otherwise, and that's the perfect model, and that's what we try to do on our show is, we don't want to, if we have people on that we disagree with, or two people on that disagree with each other, I don't want it to turn into a yelling match. I'd rather have a discussion, and I'm not expecting them to hold hands at the end of the thing and sing Kumbaya. But I hope that they would at least listen to each other, and then that way the audience is better informed. Yeah, this person said a good point. This person said a good point. You bring up like the Zeitgeist thing. I always use as an example. I went to a major libertarian festival, and then I went to a Zeitgeist festival in like the same summer. And what struck me about going to these two very diametrically opposite belief systems and political viewpoints was that they all talked about the same problems. That they had were all the same, like the quote unquote enemies, or the belief systems that they were both trying to change were exactly the same. And you can take ideas from all sorts of everything on the political spectrum. You can take ideas from the Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Green parties, Zeitgeist. You can take all those ideas, put them all together, take the best from everything, and that is what the country is supposed to be. That's what a free-thinking society is supposed to have, is you take the best ideas from all thought processes and say, hey, how can we apply them to this? You know what? Let's take some ideas from the libertarians and put that into, reforming big government. Let's take some ideas from the Green Party into reforming corporate pollution. Let's take some ideas from all these different places, and because they're all good ideas. Every group has at least one or two great ideas for how to make the world a better place.
One group's not going to suddenly be the one to say this is the way we should all live our lives, and that's why the idea of partisan politics with judges. You can't, belong to a political party. You have to be sort of apolitical in a sense as a judge. And I think that presidents should also be sort of apolitical. That would be, there's my throw in the ring of solutions, is that we shouldn't have someone who belongs to a political party, especially when our political parties are so incredibly combative, in charge of everything. The person at the top who is sort of that overseeing all of the arguments in Congress and everything else, and the guy who's supposed to speak for America, to me, that person should be neutral. There's supposed to be a neutral party to say, okay, you know what, we're stopping the car and we're turning around and we're going home and you guys are going to figure this out. You can't do that if you are beholden to a political party, which means our president, half of our Congress, half of the Senate, half of the people in federal government are beholden to a bunch of people and money that got them their jobs. Whether they're at the bottom or at the top, somebody paid a lot of money for you to get that job, and now you owe them something.
That's what makes
American people. And I think too much what you see is that they end up kowtowing to things. It's a really good example, war on drugs. Obama signed, there was this ridiculous disparity for years between crack and cocaine, which is ridiculous because crack is watered down cocaine, but it had a 100 times difference in sentencing. So you could have 100 times more powder cocaine than crack cocaine and get the same amount of sentence. It was out of control. So like a couple of little rocks or a guy with a huge bag walking down Wall Street, they both get the same amount. So the big the great we're really going to turn back on the war on drugs, and Obama signed in a 10-to-1 ratio. Still makes 0 sense. Pure cocaine and a watered down, less effective version of it is still a bigger sentence. We still are fighting a ridiculous drug war that has decimated middle America and urban cities. Now it's that thing where first it was it's a ghetto drug, and it's this, and it was when all of a sudden the prisons are full of young African American men and their families are suffering. We didn't say anything and nobody did anything, and it's this idea. You have people like Giuliani that like to point and go, see, they're just full of criminals. They're full of criminals. That's why. And it's like, you're criminalizing something that everybody does. If you went down one day and stop and frisked on Madison Avenue on the Upper East Side and put away every single person you found to the full extent of those mandatory minimums, no questions asked, no question, just in jail, done, like they do with young African Americans, you would have a war, because every other person walking down Fifth Avenue has got illegal drugs in their purse or in their wallet. Trust me. I used to live in New York and I used to work on Madison Avenue. Trust me, they all have it. There's a reason. And now with meth, you have the same thing to poor people, white poor people, white and Hispanic poor people in middle America. They don't have jobs, they don't have health insurance, their lives suck, so they turn to drugs, as everyone does. Just because you have a doctor's prescription doesn't change the ultimate thing. Your life sucks, things are hard, so they turn to something, and they're decimating another entire class of people, just to do this one thing. And it's politics. It's because everybody needs to get reelected, so they keep
Well, that and
pushing.
I think it's a little bit of a hidden race war too. I think that, there's a little bit of, this is our way where we can be a little bit racist, but we can justify it. The fact that crack and cocaine are the exact same drug. I mean, you look at, the crack epidemic. I had Rick Ross on the show, and he was a part of, bringing. He didn't know at the time, but he was bringing in CIA cocaine that he was selling, and it's just so, and then they'll put you in jail for the same drugs that they brought into the country. And look at Afghanistan. It's like, how much of the opium comes from there, but yet we have all our military there. So, how is this stuff, happening? It's only because we're letting it happen. And when there's that much money in prisons and stuff like that, then you have to keep them full. There's unions, there's, everybody has to keep making money. You can't get rid of minimum sentencing. You can't get rid of, what Portugal did and decriminalize all drugs, because then our prisons would shrink.
Well, and I think, it's interesting, when you bring up, it's kind of like a subtle race war. I'll actually go you one better. I think what it really is it's a war against poor people.
It's a class war.
At the end of the day, it's a class war. It's we've marginalized elements of our society because we moved, industry away. We shipped industry overseas. Well, what do we do with these people? Let's marginalize them, make them scary, make them trying to cope with the loss of job and infrastructure in their lives, and let's make that an evil thing, and then let's shove them into prisons because we frankly don't know what to do with them. And we can make money off them that way. And I think what you're seeing is what I think people are realizing is that what you have today is a very real class warfare. You have,
and it pits races against each other, because what it does is say, you have poor white people finally realizing that they're being treated in the same way that poor African American was, and people of color for decades and decades and centuries in this country, that they're both being treated the same way. And suddenly you have white people standing up and going like, hey, this is happening. And you have African Americans and people of color who are going, yeah, that's been happening to us forever, and you didn't say anything. So there's the anger of them going like, oh, now it's your fight because you're here, and it works all in their favor, because then we're all fighting with each other. They do it with feminism, they do it with anything. Anytime there's a movement, they do it with Occupy. They figure out a way, when everybody starts to figure out that
the game is rigged.
It is, absolutely.
They sit and pit everyone against each other, and it's hard, because it's hard to have that conversation. When I went to Baltimore, the thing is, when I being in Baltimore and talking to people there, it was pretty amazing, because I had at least 3 or 4 people point out they do this to poor white people too, so I don't know why they're not standing up. That this is obvious. Everyone knows what's happening. Everybody knows why Baltimore is the way it is. Everybody knows how this stuff happens. Everybody knows how the cops are. And the thing is, they say is that if people think that they won't do this to you because you're white, they're coming for you too. And it's true.
Because you're poor. At the end of the day,
there's too many people, and we don't have enough food in the minds of people at the top. And I think people think, well, if we can just sort of somehow take this lower bottom poor people who just don't try hard enough. If we can just get them out of the way and get them out, then there'll be more for the rest of us. And I think what the middle class who are being sold this lie don't realize is that when you get rid of all, here's you in the middle, here's the top, and here's all these dirty poor people at the bottom who just aren't trying hard enough. Once you push all them out, who do you think's on the bottom now? Because it's all going to shift down, and you are going to be at the guy at the bottom, and then eventually they're going to it's all going to keep cycling around, and you're going to be treated even worse. And they're just going to keep pushing people at the bottom, and it's gross. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in the head of man. It causes war. It causes disease. It causes hatred.
It causes revolution at the end of the day too.
No, this is how we all ended up in the United States in the first place, because the same thing was being done to people in other countries. It continues to go on in other countries, and we have to just stop fighting ideological wars and start fighting for each other and start fighting for a better life. That's just, it's strange to me. Bridges are literally falling apart. Dams are literally falling apart.
Oh, I know. I work construction. I see it. I mean, you should see some of the places where they recklessly spend money. I mean, we're doing a project now. It's like The whole project, we're one of the subcontractors, but the whole project's $5.5 million, and it's in like a back road of some small country town, and nobody uses this road. And I'm like, we're spending all this money here, but yet, like close to where I live in Ludlow, there's a bridge they just shut down because it's unsafe. They have another bridge that needs to be fixed, and just hasn't been fixed and won't be fixed for years. Like so, and most of us, and we talked about this last time, Tab, when you were on the show because you were working on the documentary on infrastructure. The whole idea of every day you drive around, like just think about how many roads do you know that are like in good condition? How many bridges do you know that are in good condition? Very few. So where's all our tax money going? And so it just, and that's why it's not an income problem, it's a spending problem. But yet you'll see on CNN when they say, oh, we're dropping Tomahawk missiles that are valued at 20 mil a piece or whatever, and I'm just like, there's people who literally, if they lose their job today, will lose their house tomorrow, and yet you're just recklessly spending money on wars that most people are too busy today to even know what's going on in the Middle East. Who we're fighting, nobody knows. It's just like, so it's one of these things where just like we really have to come together, and we have to look at, and you're right, they do turn us against each other, because if I had $1 for every time somebody said, oh, it's all those welfare people, I'm like, we spend more money on corporate welfare, on subsidies, on the tax breaks. I'm like, so they're turning us on each other, so then we don't focus on the fact that these guys are getting all these these loopholes. It's
the woman getting $1,200 a month to feed her kids is a problem, but the corporation that gets $12 million a day in tax breaks isn't a problem.
That's not a problem, because and
they're not creating any jobs with their great tax breaks, which I know tons of politicians.
Well, you look at
Michelle Bachmann to Obama like to pretend that, if you just give them tax breaks, they don't create jobs. They take that money and they pocket it.
Right. TPP. Look at the TPP. Well, that's going to be fucking scary, man.
I would love to look at the TPP.
But apparently it's so great. It's so star-spangled great that we don't even need to see it. No. It's like looking at the Holy Grail.
It is. Like our faces would melt if we read it.
It reminds me so much of the NAFTA thing, because it was funny when the TPP thing happened. I actually went back and saw some of the not Ralph Nader, the Ross Perot debates about NAFTA, and I'm like, because it's funny how history always seems like it's different characters but the same story over and over again, and they're selling the NAFTA deal the same way they're selling the TPP deal, and it's like the same debate, it's the same idea, and Ross Perot was like, no, this isn't what's going to happen, like people are going to lose their jobs. And actually talking about Ross Perot, he also reminded me of when your father ran as governor, because they're telling your father, oh, don't vote for him, it's a wasted vote. They said the same thing about Ralph Nader. They said the same thing about Ross Perot. They don't want us to look at third options, and they convince you that's a wasted vote. So I just think we have to look at the bigger picture and understand that, like you said, it is a class warfare. It is, the rich against everybody else, and we do have to come together and not let these little battles between our religious or our political parties or welfare and all these other issues that get us fighting, which really at the end of the day we're fighting while they're all profiting, and I think that's scary.
And I think it's important to note that that it's not that all rich people are bad. It's not that the percentage of people who are and we're not talking about like the guy who did really good and is making an upper middle class income of $100,000 a year, or actually I don't even know if that's actually upper middle class income anymore. But you're not talking about the guys in the nicer neighborhoods in your average town. We're talking about a very small fraction of people and corporations and corporate culture that. You look at studies where, it is, when they say the point, it's the 0.01%. When they talk about that, the 1% isn't your guy who owns the car dealership, who owns 6 car dealerships in your town. That's not who you're talking about. You're talking about the people that they make a decision and it affects countries.
Right. It's like at some point, I wish people who support, the people in and around, say, the Koch brothers, if they suddenly would just stop and think about the fact that the Koch brothers have $1 billion to buy an election.
Yeah.
Do you know how many factories you could open up with $1 billion? Do you know how many jobs you could create with $1 billion? And these are businessmen that are on your side, and they're pissing away $1 billion so somebody can get a job and do what? You could literally do something. $1 billion. build some factories, $1 billion, give people work.
Raise their wages.
Raise the wages of the people you already have.
You know,
if you have that money, why would you care? Because I'm sorry, I grew up blue collar, I grew up on government cheese, I grew up on all of that. Like, I did not get a free hand in anything. I was very lucky to have a lot of people around me that were very supportive and opportunities to work really hard. It's like I had 3-4 jobs in high school just to pay for my school clothes and my private high school and things like that, and to go on field trips. And when I went to college, I'm in debt still, to pay for my school. I had to work. That's what I had to do. The problem is, that isn't even a possibility for most kids these days, because there aren't enough part-time jobs to support them. There aren't enough opportunities, and there aren't enough loans. It's so expensive that they can't even do anything to get out.
Yeah, and this issue isn't about, lower middle class and poor people looking for a handout. This issue is about, allowing people to live that American dream. This is about people allowing them to have the opportunity to pull themselves out from a dire situation and live a life, if not for them, but for their children. That's what it's about. It's not about making everybody rich or, like a communist sense of that, that kind of thing.
Having opportunity.
It's about allowing people to have opportunity. And I think what we're not realizing right now is that a majority of Americans and people around the world are in situations that they and their children and their children's children may never get out of, and may never have the opportunity to succeed and get out of. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to rebuild the infrastructure to succeed again, to have the ability to get out, barring, it's ludicrous to me that you look at elements of society and you say, well, the only way for these people to get out of their situation is if they become athletes or musicians or entertainers. That's ludicrous to me, because that's rare. Having the talent to get out of a poor situation, white, black, brown, whatever, shouldn't be dependent upon being completely gifted at one specific thing. Everyone should have an equal opportunity to get out, to pull themselves up, to move forward, to provide for their families in a better way. Well,
but we don't. I mean, the thing is, if we took half the prisons in this country, took down the barbed wire and put up blackboards and made them into trade schools and started teaching, IT, computers, technology, robotics, construction, basic trade skills, carpentry, electronics, plumbing. If we turned those places into places of learning, when you take somebody who is caught dealing drugs or stealing or doing especially nonviolent crimes, especially when it's situations where it's like, well, I have to feed my kid, or I have, so everybody's got to pay their bills.
Yeah.
And if you took those people and said, all right, you clearly need some sort of skill. Mm-hmm. You need to have, more skills so that you can go into the job market. And if we just use the resources we have in a different way, from our prisons to our schools already, public schools are just
a mess.
Yeah. I mean, I had 8 years of public school and 8 years of private school, and I look at how even public school is now today, and it
astounds me.
I can't even make sense of it. I'm like, what are they teaching you?
They're making everybody robots. They're having you basically memorize information and not use critical thinking and stuff like that. I mean, you guys both are obviously very creative. Your type of job, you're always trying to come up with new ideas and stuff, and you're working that part of your brain. And the first thing that always gets cut in schools is arts and music and stuff that helps you use that side of your brain. I mean, and I think it's so crucial for kids that's why I always preach on this show. I'm like, if you have a hobby, I know we all procrastinate, find some time to do it. You'll be way happier. Like 90% of our lives were spent doing shit we have to do. Like we have to do. And then 10% of our, we do things we actually want to do. So it's just like, and that's if you have the energy. I mean, the way the system's designed, this idea that, you retire 65 after giving all your best years, all your health, all your energy, all your time to some corporate monster. And now, that's the American dream. Now you retire and you get to enjoy life if you're not sick or have whatever, that's just, I think, I think, I think we can do better in that. I think that we can do much better in that. And
my grandfather had my dad's father had a great line when we were growing up. He's like, I don't understand. This is just funny. He's like, I don't understand retirement at 65. And what do you mean? He's like, well, man, by the time you're 65, you don't have, you're wore out, you're beat up, you're facing the end of your life, when they should do retirement from age 18 to 30, and that should be retirement. And then you work the rest of your life. So that way you have time to enjoy your life.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. I had the amazing Jonathan on, the comedian. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Yeah, he was on. He was telling me a story about his father, how he worked. They grew up near Detroit. I don't know if it was in Detroit or near Detroit, but he worked at a factory. His dad hated his job. Every single day complained about his job. Absolutely hated it. He retired, and soon after he died. And it was just like, you wonder what causes that. Is it the fact that you don't have any time to even find fulfillment in anything else, where that job becomes your life, and then once you retire, then it's like, well, now what do I have? I have nothing. I've invested all my time and energy in just trying to gain financially. I just had a son in February, and
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a hell of an experience, and it's one of those things where like it's starting to hit me how similar we are to kids, and how we have to remember that kids, it doesn't matter how expensive the thing is that you buy them. They always remember you throwing the ball with them or bringing them to the park. They don't remember that expensive toy you bought them. And we have to remember that never changes. As we become adults, we can buy the expensive car, but what you enjoy is when you guys go out and have a good time. That's what you remember. You don't remember the new house or the new watch or whatever. And that we have to start remembering that that's where happiness is, and that's where we'll find happiness. And I think that they've done that study on most CEOs and stuff like that have like some symptoms of being psychopathic and all, and I think you almost have to be to get that far, because I mean in America, being cutthroat and not and being shameless is how it's how you succeed. It's actually a great way of running a business and making money. I mean, a lot of business owners I've met, a lot of them are completely shameless and don't care about who they piss off. And to me, it's just like it's an addiction to money, and we don't look at addiction to money as we do to addiction to cocaine or alcohol or anything else. But the symptoms are the same. I mean, your whole life, all day, that's all you're thinking about. You need to get your fix, and even when you get some, you still want more. I mean, is it not the same thing? If we all had the money that the Koch brothers had, you think we'd be trying to sway political,
care less about
them. What we would be doing is sitting on a beach, reading books, having some margaritas, relaxing, enjoying life. I don't understand what motivates these people after they're already billionaires to still wake up every day and try to make more money. And it just, to me, there is something that's a little wrong with them, or they've been taught, especially in our capitalistic, America that we live in, we've been taught that we judge people based on your financial gain, and you keep thinking that's what makes you happy, not the person you are, not the, you talked about growing up in a blue-collar family. My parents, same thing. I was born in a house with no running water, farm, everything we ate, we grew, and they were happier then than they are now. And my dad talked about this. I remember growing up and my father would be like, damn, he's like, I was happier in Portugal. I'm like, Dad, you didn't even have TV in Portugal. You didn't have running water in Portugal. You had a well that everybody had to go get water from. And he's like, yeah, but we didn't have any stresses. He's like, at the end of the day, the family hung out, we drank, we made wine and we drank, we enjoyed each other's company. We didn't have all those stresses. And I think there's a lot to that. And I think that the younger generation, especially, and I think that the internet's changing everything, because we're living in a generation where the younger generation, they don't really give a fuck about money, because they're growing up in a world where everything's free. Music's free. You can Skype for free. You can watch
it's affordable, if nothing else. It's okay. I'll pay $10 a month and I get to stream all this stuff, or they find things they're good at. And I think the other thing is what you see with millennials. I'm too old to be a millennial. I'm the oldest one around here.
Millennial at heart.
I am. I always say I'm OG hipster, because I look around and I'm like, this is what I was doing in high school. This is what I was wearing in high school. This is the music I was listening to in high school. Finally, I'm cool. 20 years later. If only these kids had been around when I was in high school, it'd be like awesome. But I think with millennials, what they're seeing is, they're going back to simpler things. You see crafting things with your hands, crafting, and it seems like such a silly thing, but they're learning to sew. They're learning, that you have, it's sort of this like artisanal cheese, and everybody laughs at it, but how many people for the last 20 years have been out wanting to learn how to be, how to bake bread and open a bakery? How many actually create things that we have factories to do? How many people are actually learning, how to cure meats, how to, make cheeses, how to make food, how to cook, how to create, how to build, design, crafting things with our own hands and making something and learning something new. That's becoming what makes people happy. And it isn't about, I'm going to do this and make a ton of money. It's, I'm going to have the coolest, artisanal cheese bar in all of, Williamsburg. But that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
These are kids who aren't going to Wall Street. They're like, I don't need $1 million.
Well, I
just want a cool coffee shop to hang out at. And it's awesome. And they're giving something to their community and they're doing something. The kids today know how to do more. It's like I say, I'm like, when the apocalypse comes, all these people who have all of the technology in the world and all of these things happen, if the zombie apocalypse happened, they're done. These kids who know how to feed themselves and make clothes and know how to do things are going to survive. We understand that we have to learn a different way to live. And that's why, it's like I have so much hope because they can feed themselves and clothes. They figured it out in a tough economy and figured out how to live their lives the way they want, the music they want, and do things and travel. They're scrappy.
Yeah, and it's
because they had to be.
It's interesting because they had to be. It's interesting because you get that sense that these are kids who were born post Watergate, post JFK, Martin Luther King assassinations. They're born with a sense of cynicism that previous generations didn't have. I think they kind of can look around through access to information and things like that and say, you know what, I don't trust what those in power tell me, so I have the ability through the internet and through, like you're saying, to kind of create my own version of happiness, and I don't have to be dependent upon what Big Brother tells me to do. And I think that when you have a mindset like that, and then they lived through the crash of 2008, that they look at institutions and say, you know what, the institutions are too big, they're too, they try to control too much. I can live happily as an individual with my family and things like that. And I have a lot of hope because of that, because they, in 2020, they're going to make up 40% of the voting block, and they already make up the majority of the workforce. And so when you have a generation of people who are independent minded, I don't get some of the things that they do in terms of what they like, but hey, that's the glory of getting older.
That music, I don't understand it.
But when you have 40% of the voting block and a majority of the workforce, and when they see economically how they're being oppressed, that's going to be a powerful generation. And I hope, and I'm hoping to see this, I think you're going to see a 60s level renaissance of 60s era renaissance of press, music, art, culture coming up fast, because they know the game is rigged and they have the numbers to change it. And they're young and they're idealistic enough. That's the key. You got to have that energy of youth to fight the machine, so to speak, for lack of a better metaphor. But and I think they have that energy. They're a little apathetic at times. They're
apathetic about things that they don't care about, and they're apathetic about conversations they're not being included in. And that's what's happening. That's why you have so many,
But I have a lot of hope.
Politicians who just don't even care enough to talk to them.
I had a lot of cynicism because I'm kind of a tweener generation, but I'm
Generation X.
Yeah.
I'm like, whatever.
I have a lot of hope. And one of the things I enjoy about doing this show and doing Watching the Hawks is I try to bring to the show a sense of hope. Because we can't, if we allow ourselves to get too cynical, if we allow ourselves to kind of throw up our hands and say, we're never going to change this, we're never going to beat the system, we're never going to, change the world we live in, that's defeatist. And I look at it like, look, it might not change in my lifetime, but if what I do on the show and what Tab and Sean does, if what other great minds, and I'm not a great mind, but what other people do, we have the ability to influence and help give information to a generation that might the world.
At least make more well-informed decisions.
Yeah, and that's the motivation and drive for me in doing Watching the Hawks, is that if I can be the spark that helps ignite the brain that does bring about a better world, that's all I want. That's all I want to help do. If I can be a pot chain, I will die happy at the end of my life.
Well, that's why this show's called The Ripple Effect. I mean, I preach it over and over again. Like, I keep telling people, it just, even if it's as simple as retweeting an interesting story, if it's as simple as next time you're at the bar, bring up a conversation about the TPP, bring up a conversation about what's going on in Baltimore, get some people's opinions, talk about it, and I think that we all, like you said, we have this idea that we can't make a difference. I mean, I was a kid born in Portugal, came to America at 3. The school system said I was a dumbass, which, I mean, it was partially correct, and it put me in special ed, told me, and I've had people on like you guys who which is, to me, it's a huge honor. And it's just like a couple years ago, this was just a idea I had, and I started with a buddy and kind of just went from there. And so it just, I think that if I just believed, like you said, Tyrel, this idea that I can't do anything, then I wouldn't be here right now. But I told myself that even if I could do something, as little as it is, it's something. And at least I can look in the mirror, and now having a son saying that, hey, I'm going to do my best to try leave this world a little better for him than it was for me, then to me, that's worth it. And that's what motivates me. And I think that I'd rather fight trying than just give up. I mean, how many old people have you met that said, I wish I didn't chase my dream? They all say, I wish I chased my dream longer, further. I put in a little bit more effort. I mean, and so you look at it, put yourself in their shoes. Like, you don't want to be that person who didn't put as much effort as possible to do that. And I think that we all can make a difference, as little as it is. And I know a lot of us do get stuck with debt right out of college, and then so you have to work, or you end up having kids at a young age, and you don't have time to do something that you feel like is significant. But even the littlest of act, I think, can go a long way. And like you said, even if Tyrel Ventura himself doesn't change the world, your opinions and your ideas and your show and you and Tabetha having these conversations, there could be a young kid who's 18, 19 watching your show. He could be the next big time politician or the next activist that changes the world, the next Martin Luther. I mean, all these people who've changed the world, they all had people who influenced them. Martin Luther King, so just like those people, I'm sure, same way they influenced somebody that they never thought they'd be influencing somebody who's going to change the world. So I think that we have to remind ourselves that, try to do something, and even if it's simple, if it's little, because that's the thing, a lot of these shows we do talk about the issues, and then everybody always says, well, what are we going to do about it? And I think just talking about it is doing something. And would you guys agree with that?
Oh,
Absolutely.
Because through conversation and through the sharing of ideas is where you might get that one spark. I mean, how many amazing inventions in mankind, that changed the face of humanity came from, someone writing an idea down on a cocktail napkin. Some inventor late at night in his office, like, oh, this might be really interesting. I want to make a light bulb.
Yeah.
And figuring out, and it's figuring out how you can seeing a bigger picture, seeing, the underlying factors with something, and then realizing how you can change it in your own life. When you see what's happening, if you see what's happening to people of color, the next time you're out and the next time you interact with a person of color, maybe you're going to do that differently. Maybe you're going to have a conversation with that person, learn a little bit more about their life. And in reverse, because I think there's so much of the next time you see a white person and you take that moment to maybe, learn something about, where you're both coming from. And I guarantee most of us are going to sit down and realize that we have a whole lot in common, and there's a lot that we didn't understand about our own communities and how it was affecting other communities, and how ultimately we're all part of the same community. We're all part of the same big community. We're not, it's the 21st century. It's 2015. We don't live in these little pockets where, it's little mini utopias. Utopia is all of us working together, all of us helping each other. And
I look at it like this, man. You see so much racism, classism, you see these things popping up all over, you see war, you see all that. To me, it's like the dying breaths of an old way of thinking.
Yeah.
It's always loudest right before it dies.
Which is why the politicians all seem so cartoonish, because they're like,
And I think
nobody's
that
listening.
as society is kind of changing underneath their feet, they're going to yell and holler, but that doesn't mean that they're the majority.
Mm-hmm.
It's the last gasp is always the loudest. And I think we got to remember that. And
they're getting louder and louder, and crazier and crazier.
Yeah, like you pointed out so eloquently, naming the things ripple effect. It's not about the grand scale. It's about just doing little things. It's like it's the same thing my dad taught me. If you truly, he was a mayor before he was governor, and when he was mayor, he taught me something very important, and I think a lot of people forget this because we get caught up in the kind of glitz and glam of federal politics and all of that. If you want to see your street fixed, you got to go to City Hall in your neighborhood, in your community. You can affect more change in your community on a local level than you will ever affect on a national level. On a global, and it starts there. You got to cut the legs out first. You got to start small and build. And like you said, man, it's little things. It's put a little post. It's going to your city council meetings and actually paying attention, and saying, hey, you know what? I don't like the way this wetland might be bulldozed from this construction crew. You know what? I'm going to go fight for that at the local level. Yeah. That's where you start that change.
Yeah, go.
And that's it. I think that's going to be, sort of millennial approaches, is that they're going to start seeing that being a city councilman, being, running for local office, enacting that change on a local level is really what's going to change everything overall.
Building
because
a community garden.
Eventually what's going to happen is that it's going to be on a community level, it's going to hit the state level, and then everyone at the state level who wants to get elected is going to have to get with the program or be left behind, because that guy and girl who's the city councilman who got the community garden, who got the roads fixed, who did the things, who put up, enacted new programs, they're going to be the one that becomes the next state senator. They're going to be the one that's the next governor, and then they're going to be in Washington. And that's just it. You either get with the program or get out of the way of a new world. Like you're not even going to be here when most of us have to deal with all this stuff.
Yeah.
People in Washington being 50, 60, 70 years old. It's like, dude.
I always laugh because it's like, how can you have a judge or a politician who's 70-some years old making decisions on internet, freedom on the internet or NSA listening devices and things like that when they don't even understand the technology itself or how it works.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right.
And
it's a new world.
Yeah, and like I said,
it's
man,
good. It's we live in a world where the possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
And innovation is just,
And then, gosh, man, look, we have, and we got to get out of just, we got to focus on positive things. One of the things we want to do with the show is also show the positive aspects of humanity, not just the negative. I mean, my God, we have a rover on Mars. That's incredible, and we kind of forget it because it's just, I don't know why, but we kind of like, you see the leaps and bounds we've taken as human beings, as
even bigger. As the human race sent a probe for over 10 years out into space and landed it on a comet.
Yeah.
Flying through space millions of miles and it going millions of miles an hour. If you can't see that humanity is clearly ready for the next step and is clearly capable of much more than what we're doing, it makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
The 10 years we went 10 years ago thinking, you know what? I bet we can hit it. I can hit it. And we did.
It's incredible.
We have pictures and sound from a comet flying through space. That should make everyone in the world stop for 5 seconds and be like, wow, we are awesome. Think about what we could do right here on Earth if we can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
nothing is simple.
And most of these scientists and people who create this amazing technology, unfortunately, it's a military complex who takes it and uses it for evil. But most of these scientists really have. I mean, you look at Nikola Tesla. I mean, I briefly mentioned him. It's this. he wanted to do what was best for the world. He wanted to create free energy for everybody. And then it was, follow the money. It was JP Morgan and everybody who was like, oh, we can't make money off free energy. So so it just, but you're right. We are capable of beautiful things. And I think when you look at the Earth from, you see these pictures from space, you realize like, holy shit, we're just all on this floating little spaceship. And we all should try to figure out how to keep the spaceship alive and how to get along. And we can't keep raping resource after resource for profit and then thinking that it's going to last forever, and I've been I think it was in New York they did a study where the life expectancy was so much lower just because of all the breathing in of fumes and brake dust and all this stuff. And it's funny how we don't realize how much of that shit we're breathing in. And I was talking to my wife about making a product that you put in gas tanks where you could actually, it would turn the exhaust fumes into a color, so we could actually see what's going in the air. And so that way people, because I think because it's invisible, we don't see it, we kind of detach ourselves from, we forget that there's this stuff floating in the air that we're breathing in every day. And I was saying how it'd be interesting to see how much of this shit is in the air and how much of it we're actually breathing in, especially in a place like New York where it's bumper to bumper and cars to car. But
that's why I'm a smoker. I can see the toxins.
I control.
Well, thanks a lot, guys. I'm sure the last thing you want to do is spend your Saturday night with me. So
we talk for a living.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us on, and I will always close everything the way I always do, is that we're in this world we're not told we're loved enough. So I tell you all listening, I love you.
Yeah, I love that ending. That's awesome. And it's funny to hear that you weren't supposed to be in front of a camera, because you seem like a natural now in front of the camera. And it's just like the fact that you didn't want to go in front of a camera, it's like, really, this guy, you seem like it'd be the story that there's videos of you, like entertaining the family at Christmas and stuff. But apparently
those exist now. I like being behind the camera, man. I like watching people like Tabetha and Sean Stone and yourself. I like watching people more than I like being in front. I also know how important it is right now to do what I do, and so I will sacrifice my timidness to be in front of the camera for the greater good.
For the greater good. One humanity.
I'm also a raging narcissist.
Hey, thanks, guys. Hey, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. I did forget to mention in the beginning of the show, in the intro, so I'll mention it now real quick at the end of the show. They did call in using video, so if you want to see the video version of this episode, check out RV Theory 6 on YouTube. That's the name of the YouTube channel, or you can just search the Ripple Effect Podcast and go to the YouTube channel, and you'll see the video version of this episode. Like most of you would probably know by now, anybody who calls in using video, you can see the video version of the episode on our YouTube channel, and you can actually visually see us have the conversation. So one other way of watching the show and enjoying the show. So thanks again, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Believe in the ripple effect.